Welcome to this presentation today on behalf of Middlesex University here in London. My name's Kevin McDonald. I'm the head of the Department of Criminology and Sociology at Middlesex, and I'm also a professor of sociology. That means I work in the disciplines, in the social science discipline. A lot of you, if you're interested in criminology, would probably be also studying sociology at A-level, for example. Just very briefly, my own area of work, I'm a researcher. I'm working in part of a big European project at the moment on extremism and sort of pathways into that and what we might be able to do about that. In that sense, criminology and sociology are both pretty much, they're theoretically framed, but they're applied disciplines. They're sort of trying to make sense of the world we live in, about how to make it better, and part of that involves trying to understand the problems we experience and how we might respond to them. So, and in particular, I suppose criminology as a social science is particularly concerned with that. So I'm going to speak for about half an hour, I think, in particular around some of the kinds of crime and social harm emerging in what you might call a digital age, which is an age increasingly networked. Let's see if I can turn this first of all. There we go. Just by way of introduction, criminology, the term criminology points to crime, but the discipline of criminology is broader than crime. It is associated with kinds of social harm that are produced, if you like, by the ways we live together. And one of those is crime, but the discipline is engaged with the cluster of social harms around crime, and in particular, trying to understand that, and also what we can be doing about it. So criminology is very much an applied discipline, and there are different kinds of pathways around employment linked to the problem areas, if you like, or the question areas that structure criminology as a discipline. And over the time, criminology has gone through very significant changes. As the world's changed around it, the discipline has reconfigured itself. It's had new agendas, new ways of thinking about things. And historically, criminology had nothing to do really with crime that took place in private spaces. And that's also because the modern policing, which emerged in 1830s, 1840s, was very much focused on law and order in the streets. And it's only really from the 1970s, 1980s that policing, and to an extent also criminology as a discipline, started to think about crime that takes place in private places. And in particular, gendered violence is an example of that. And over the last 20 years, ecological crime has become more an issue as there's been understanding of pollution, climate change, the actors who are producing ecological disaster in a way, and forms of criminal activity associated with that. So the discipline changes as the world changes around it and as responses to crime change as well. So what I'm looking at here is cybercrime. Sorry, I've got a printer going in the background. But that's very much, the term cybercrime reflects the extent to which the world we live in is increasingly constituted by digital networks. We're sort of connected to each other in digital ways, but also digital cultures. And both of those are involved in criminal, the forms of crime that the discipline of criminology is engaging with at the moment. Banking, finance, there are obvious ways that we're connected in a digital way. Social media, if you like, we're more and more connected in those sorts of ways. All of those point to new kinds of organization and changing relationships between, on the one hand, information, but also how we communicate with each other. So that's, if you like, setting up a big space. So we live in a digitally connected world. And that world is increasingly one where we encounter people in different ways. And in a way, we're vulnerable potentially to different kinds of crime. And one example of that, and to capture some of the issues involved, is what you might call the blurring relationship between being involved in a criminal activity and also as a victim. And if we can capture this, it points to the way that digital communication and information are part of increasingly organized crime. And one type of organized crime that targets students in particular, and that's you here listening today, is what's known as money mules, or if you like, organized money laundering. If you like, digital crime as a paradigm seeks to integrate more and more people in ways that are perhaps less and less evident to them. They might be a victim of that, and in that sense, it's a lot easier for someone to steal £1 of 1 million people than £1 million of one person. So there's a whole kinds of networks around new kinds of theft occurring at the moment. But appeals are made to students, if you like, to be involved in laundering money in ways that they may not be quite aware that they're even part of that system. Recently, there were ads on TikTok with, do you see the hashtag there, British school check, school life, selling how to make money in school. All of those ads, or not all of them, but certainly this particular one and others like it, are, if you like, integrating students into a world that's in fact a system of organized crime. The appeal to students is, oh, you can make some money here by also helping out people. International students are particularly targeted for this. I know someone, or my brother's in a country, they want to transfer money to the UK. They can't do it. My bank account won't work. Could we use your bank account to send the money, and you'll get a very small percentage paid to you? So you're, as a student, you say, well, that sounds good. I can help out somebody, and I can also make a little bit of money at the same time. You'll say yes. And in the process, you're becoming part of one of the biggest dimensions of organised crime in the United Kingdom and internationally. The National Crime Agency estimates that there's between 36 and 90 billion pounds a year money laundered in the United Kingdom. Because there's so much money involved in organised crime at the moment, the challenges of getting that into the system where it can be spent legally are enormous. Last year in Antwerp, 90 tons of cocaine were seized. Now that's an enormous amount of cocaine, just that was the amount that was seized. That gives you some of the scale of the criminal economy, if you like, and the need for laundering money involved in that. And many people find themselves, if you like, integrated into this world without really recognizing they're part of it, and then might become part, once they realize they're part of it, it might potentially become too late to do anything about. So it's one of the paradigms of digital crime. It's a distributed system. Thousands of people are involved in it in different ways. And in some cases they know, excuse me, and in others they may not, or they might suspect it, but they may not be sure. And these patterns of crime are associated, and we can see that with one of the areas I'm just speaking very briefly about, what's called ransomware. Ransomware is applications that you can use to go into someone's system, lock it up, and have to pay you money to get their information back. And increasingly, systems have become more complex. There's now a sector of the illegal economy that's emerged that's essentially called ransomware as a service. And this is, I'll put a little, I don't know if you can see this image here. It's Egality. It's a service basically that you subscribe to, and you pay this organization, and they will in fact execute ransomware demands on your behalf. They'll lock up people's computers, they'll take ransom from them, and they will then pay a proportion of that money back to you. It's a driver of one of the really big changes occurring at the moment in organized crime, which is crime as a service. And the digital world's very important for that, because you can have crime undertaken for you and you don't know who's doing it. You're going to pay some midpoint, and then they're going to pass on the money to somebody else. You don't know who's committing the crime, and the person who's committing the crime doesn't know who's paying for it, because of a kind of, you can have a digital market, if you like, in between it. Could be on the dark web, could be on the surface web. So one of the really big challenges for crime as such is trust. How can you be involved with people in crime that you can trust? And the digital world in some ways allows that to be solved. You can create a kind of intermediary that you don't know and they don't know. And so the person committing the crime, even if they are some way detected, they can't say who's paid them to do it, because it's gone through a kind of intermediary, a kind of wall that's blocking that out. And also vice versa. If you're the paying for it, you don't know who's actually done it. And it's one of the really big models driving transformation of crime at the moment, across all areas, which is crime as a service, and effectively a kind of new type of criminal economy that's emerging in the world at the moment, based on this idea of crime as a service. And that kind of, so I'll jump forward here, that's associated with markets. So you don't have to take someone's information and then get them to pay ransom. There are now online markets where you can take someone's information and then you can sell it. You can sell it to their competitors. And these are just a couple of examples. I've blocked out the addresses there on the dark web. These are sites, and there's lots of them, where if you steal my information, you don't have to get ransom back. You can actually then sell it on to someone else. So it's very important to recognize that in terms of crime, there is in fact a criminal economy. And more it relies on a digital infrastructure. And so much so that each year, Europol, which the United Kingdom used to be part of, the European Union Crime Authority, publishes a report called the Internet Organized Crime Threat Assessment, which looks at how digital crime is reconfiguring and its impact on day-to-day lives. And you might think, well, this is really only going to affect people who are, involved in some sort of activities where they've got information they want to keep. But in fact, increasingly this kind of crime attacks and targets public infrastructure. One recent attack on the NHS is estimated to have cost £92 million and involved the cancellation of 19,000 appointments. So these things have quite significant information, and of course the NHS is targeted because it's deemed by criminal groups to have money, but it's deemed that, its information systems aren't very effective. It'd be easy to penetrate, be easy to lock and capture information and effectively demand ransom for it. So, and the people involved in this kind of activity are not, sometimes, there might be, sometimes the image of the hacker is a teenager, and in some cases they are, but more and more this kind of criminal activity is becoming more and more organized, and in fact blurring the relationship between what you might call criminal groups, sort of organized professional criminal groups, and also state actors, groups connected to state security services or networks around different kinds of governments. So there is quite significant blurring going on between what's a government, what's a criminal organization, and what's a group of teenagers And in some cases, the one attack might be, in terms of ransomware, the result of all three mixed up together. There are other kinds of criminal activity, ultimately, that don't necessarily seek to generate money as such, but in some cases, and increasingly, seek to break down social cohesion or create social tensions. And much of that's associated with the term disinformation. And it's sort of popularized in terms of fake news, but fake news has suggested, there's one fake thing or another. There are now systems of organized disinformation created by companies who can aim to set out to counter other companies. So it can be commercial, or it could be political. And it takes advantage, in a way, of the fact that sharing is a very fundamental activity that connects us all. So we get some information, we'll very often share it with someone else, in particular online. And the most recent study of online sharing in the United Kingdom last year demonstrated that 47% of people who share information online, in fact, share news that's false. Not just not quite right, but actually false. So it's a very widespread social problem. And in some cases, this is created by trolls. And some of you might know websites like 4chan and groups like that. There's people there who their activity, their fun is to troll people. But increasingly, it's also organized by groups and governments. And the picture there that you'll see on the screen has a lot of resonance in Britain. It was an attack that took place in 2017. Now that image is faked, it's manipulated to create an impression of a Muslim lady ignoring someone suffering. So it's actually a sort of put together artificial image. It's been tweaked in a particular way. And it's been posted online with Pray for London, hashtag Westminster, hashtag, and also hashtag ban Islam. And as you can see down below, it's been retweeted 1,600 times. This is on the day, after it was more, and 1,800 likes. And it's supposedly sent up that the person who's generated this supposedly is someone called Texas Lone Star. Now, and you think, well, first of all, it's a bit unusual. It sounds a little bit American. What's a Texan doing this sort of thing for? And this is a tweet. This is on Twitter. This particular tweet, the Twitter person, Texas Lone Star, has hundreds, in fact, of tweets, all about creating social tensions of some kind or another, aiming at the United States and the United Kingdom. In this case, Texas Lone Star has now been taken off Twitter by the company Twitter, because they have taken steps to identify who it is. And they've concluded that Texas Lone Star is in fact a fake identity created by an organization called the Internet Research Association. And the Internet Research Association is in fact part of the Russian state system, or funded by the Russian state system. So now this is not here setting out to generate money, but it is generating social tension and social chaos. And I've just got a question here about if I think the increased information is enabled by the lack of clear ownership of websites that display such stories, platforms not being responsible for the way a publisher would be. Certainly this is a very important area, and in fact law is now changing to make publishers more, if you like, responsible as a publisher for the circulation of this kind of information. And it's both within the European Union at the moment, there's a series of legal changes occurring that, even though the United Kingdom's left the European Union, will, I think, directly affect the UK as other European Union information law does. But it's a very important and very pertinent issue. Currently, some social media companies can say, we're just a platform, we're not responsible for anything. Whereas a newspaper, if they publish an article, can be potentially sued as the publisher for false information. It's very important to recognize in this particular one, the aim is to create social disharmony, in particular around the place of Islam in the United Kingdom. It's significant that this is created by an organized group that puts out tens of thousands of tweets and amplifies social tensions. We can also see these in other forms of social problem we're experiencing at the moment. And one of the very big ones associated with digital culture and so on is, of course, conspiracy theories. And one of the most recent ones that we're all aware of are conspiracy theories around COVID. And that's, you don't have to go very far online to discover that some people are saying this is a plot to control population. It's an attempt to insert chips into people to control their mind. It's part of a plan to replace the European population. Others will be pumping out tweets and information and saying it's caused by immigrants or ethnic minorities. Others say, well, the vaccine, if you take this vaccine, you won't be able to have a child, you'll be sterile. Others say there's secret societies here they're using COVID to create authoritarian world order. In fact, there's an enormous amount of disinformation and conspiracy theory embedded around that. Now, conspiracy theories are structured around the idea that there's things going on here we don't understand, but there's some hidden force at work. That's the structure of a conspiracy theory. There's a kind of hidden thing that if I understand it, I'll have power. I'm, in a way, a bit smarter than everybody else. I've discovered the conspiracy. So sometimes conspiracy theories appeal to what you might call people's search for, try to understand things that simply are very hard to understand and associated with anxiety, social anxieties. And a lot of the research on conspiracy theories shows that often the vulnerable groups are more likely than others to agree with these kinds of propositions and get caught up in them in different ways. And these particular kinds of theories have had detectable and visible impact on public health. They've increased the number of people who have died as a result of COVID. They've increased a whole lot of social harms. And at some point, as the issues raised before, where's a crime and where's social harm, at particular points, if there's a clear intention to damage a group, then you have moved from more a conspiracy theory is just a joke to a form of social harm. And one form of social harm extending from conspiracy theories and linked to that world has been the growth of hate speech. Again, which is not directly a product of digital culture, but has been amplified by that. One of the forms of that in particular, which is a crime, is illegal, is to identify ethnic or racial groups as the source of COVID, if you like, as a kind of hate speech against a particular group. And there's been very clear evidence of organized attempts to say Jewish people are responsible for COVID, Chinese people are responsible for COVID, Roma people are responsible for COVID, particular minority groups are responsible, and these extended therefore into the domain of what is legally a form of hate speech. While many great things are happening online, there's all sorts of fun, there's all sorts of knowledge, and you can do lots of things. Other groups are using this capacity for online communications to spread organized disinformation, targeting particular groups and saying this group is responsible for a particular social evil or social problem. And one of those, of course, is QAnon, the group that emerged and created on 4chan. in 2017 has been associated with disinformation campaigns, was directly a sort of platform for the attack on the United States Capitol building following the American election, and is now one of the fastest growing conspiracy theories in Europe, and embedded in Telegram in particular, the online Telegram application, which is a communications platform like Twitter and so on, but by the private rooms or Telegram channels that are encrypted. And the main, they're not just talking about 2 or 3 people here, or a small group of friends playing around with the conspiracy. The main QAnon Telegram channel at the moment has 300,000 subscribers, and full of images of violence being projected upon groups who are deemed to be, if you like, the cause of social problems. So this hate speech is against the law, is a field that criminologists in particular are trying to understand, where is this coming from, what can be done about it, how can we respond to this kind of thing. Because there's partly involved in an attempt to break down social trust. And if you like, ultimately the cultural basis and the confidence we have in democracy. Just a last form of criminal activity that one guy, there are many wonderful things about the online world, but criminology as a discipline tends to focus on the more problematic areas and try to think about how crime is associated here and how the legal profession, how policing and how other forms of professions involved in responding to crime should be responding to them. And without doubt, one of the important areas to understand at the moment is the development of misogyny or hatred of women. And what's referred to as the incel culture, the world, if you like, of groups of largely young men who call themselves involuntarily celibate. That means they're not involved in intimate sexual relationships with other partners. That is a kind of digital culture that has emerged over the past decade only. It's quite recent, really, and has again had significant impact amongst obviously a small group of people, but given the scale of issues involved, sometimes having tragic consequences. The largest incel website at the moment has over 100,000 discussion themes. It's got 4 million posts, tens of hundreds, certainly thousands of people from the United Kingdom participate in different ways, including a person who murdered 4 people in the town of Plymouth in August last year. So there are really important issues at stake in this culture. Now, not all incels plan violence, but the online culture of incel world is absolutely a culture built up around anger towards women, and in significant cases that spills over into hate towards women. And that raises a whole lot of very interesting and very important issues, because currently hate speech can't be directed against women. There is law against hate speech, but it protects certain groups, but it doesn't protect women because of a kind of legal principle that hate speech laws are to protect minorities, and women are a minority. So there are, very important issues here in terms of how we understand what's going on here. Why is this happening? Who is it affecting? How can we be preventing it? How we can be understanding it where it's emerging, and what can be done about it? All of these sorts of things are examples of the sorts of things criminology as a discipline is thinking about. And in particular, they signal in different ways important transformations at work, the fact we live in a digital world. Now, the world we live in that sense, is increasingly connected in new and often complex kinds of ways. we depend on each other in quite new ways. And that brings lots and lots of wonderful possibilities about the way we can live together, from all sorts of things, from learn languages, share things, cultural pursuits, lots and lots of extraordinary capacities. But it also does bring new challenges, and at times a new sense of new vulnerabilities. And in some cases, those vulnerabilities become more serious and become either threats to our economy, and that is clearly the significance of organised crime at the moment. Given the nature of the digital infrastructure, it is in fact becoming a threat to significant sectors of economic activity. It's potentially the digital culture, the digital world we live in is also opening up new kinds of threats towards our culture, if you like, to our confidence in living with each other, our recognizing that people are different, that we can get along together. And in fact, our lives are richer and fuller because of the fact that we encounter people who are different from us. And in some cases where we have groups, either in conspiracy theories like, let's say, QAnon, which emerged as a game on 4chan, or organized groups pumping out images that are manufactured with the aim of producing and amplifying social tensions. All of those things are ultimately a threat to the democracy that we live in and our capacity to live in a democratic world. Now, some of these are clearly crime, and others are forms of social harm that lead to crime. And both of those are the sorts of issues that the discipline of criminology engages with. It engages with these issues, if you like, intellectually, so it tries to understand what's happening here, what sorts of causes are at stake here, what kind of potential social harm is here, how can we prevent it, and where it's happening, how can we minimize it and respond to it. So criminology, if you like, is a discipline that's both trying to capture and engage with this world of digital transformation, both intellectually, but also as a key area of employment in the 21st century. So people with criminology backgrounds are going more and more, not only into, let's say, traditional areas of employment, might be policing or youth services or crime prevention organizations, but are more and more also part of moving into digital organizations in different form, whether it's preventing extremism, trying to monitor and moderate internet posts, trying to do research about what's going on, and also try to produce other ways of exploring who we are and how we can live together. So that's a bit of an overview of, I suppose, criminology's response to digital transformations. And in terms of what that means for young people thinking about getting into a profession via criminology, there's two sorts of big pathways for criminology graduates at the moment. One of them is a little bit more traditional. It's focusing on problems of social problems, let's say, linked to poverty and inequality, whether it's urban crime, delinquency, a whole cluster of issues pretty much shaped by the social problems linked to, in many cases, not always, but in many cases, inequality. It's been a very big area that criminologists have been working on. But the second big area of growth in terms of future graduate pathways for criminology is in fact in that area of the digital and digital crime, in a whole range of areas, from working with organizations to develop mechanisms to avoid ransomware, working with associations to try to understand who's producing tweets that are generating social harms and how you might respond to them. Working with students to make sure they don't get sucked into becoming money mules. Working with all sorts of people in banks to go out and communicate to people about how to manage your bank account correctly, how to recognize that email that says I've won $1 million in a lottery, I would like to help give it to you. There's massive education programs, prevention programs. All of these are engaging with the digital world. And in fact, in terms of marketing research and where criminology graduates are going, there are two big areas. One is that social problems and social harms linked to inequalities, and increasingly the other really big area of growth in terms of career paths is that whole cluster of in new areas of employment linked to responding to the digital world that we live in. So that's me and my little presentation. I think we've got about 40 minutes, so I think we've got a bit of time for some questions. So thank you, thanks very much. I'm not sure how we do that. I think it's in the chat, because if I'm correct, I'm not sure. So thank you, and thanks very much for your attention. I hope you have found it interesting. I haven't set out to depress you, but I have tried to focus on, what's going on and the sorts of challenges that in many ways we have to understand and respond to. And that's certainly not by, putting everybody here, into some sort of criminal response. Criminologists are involved with a lot more than that. Where the criminology is a discipline is trying to understand the kinds of social harms that are there, but also what we can be doing about it in often quite creative ways to respond to that and prevent them. So I think we've got a little bit of time, about 15 minutes up to for questions or comments, or more or as less as we need, really. I just realized I'm in the shade here. I don't know if you can actually see me, so if I am, I'm sorry about that. So do we have any comments or questions? I'd be very pleased to get your feedback in terms of what this says in terms of criminology, what it says in terms of where you might be interested in going, or any more questions about the particular areas I've looked at, which are certainly not all of digital crime associated with digital culture and digital society, but are significant areas of what is now called cybercrime or digital crime. So thank you. So I don't know how we do things here. Do we, anyone like to, I think, use the chat? Is that right?
Yeah, so if people want to use the Q&A function to ask a question, that would be great. Currently, we haven't got any questions, but we can hang around for a few more minutes to see if other people want to ask anything. That was a really, comprehensive presentation. I definitely learned a lot, so hopefully everyone watching also did. We've got a question.
Here. Okay, that's another really good question. Given the distributed nature of the threats, how can governments and agencies work together effectively to combat these? Are there formal mechanisms you know of currently? Now, that's a really great question. Distributed nature of threats means, in fact, that there are sort of multiple actors involved. It's not just one bad person, but a kind of infrastructure that's playing a role in whether it's ransomware, whether it's digital disinformation and so on. So, or, the fact that how does an individual student end up sucked into, really, becoming a kind of money mule? If you ask someone, do you want to become part of the biggest money laundering enterprise in the country? They'll probably say no. But you say, would you like to help somebody? My brother's got a friend, they're trying to send some money in the country, they can't do it. Can we use your bank account? You might say yes. So there is a whole distributed nature, a whole group of people at work that lead for that one question to be asked of an individual. Now, the question is, given the fact that it's pretty complex in that sense, is there collaboration? And in fact, yes, there is. There are governments and agencies, including small businesses and NGOs, non-government organizations and charities, all work together in lots of ways to counter these things. There are companies work together. There's a group called Tech Against Terrorism, which are online platforms in particular, and they work with associations, researchers, all sorts of people, and in particular small platforms to understand, is my platform being colonized by, let's say, terrorist groups or extremist groups? There are groups that are involved in building communications to help people understand things. There are work with banks, for example, to go out and how do you get a message through to young people that someone's asking you, oh, can you help my brother's friend? Can I use your bank account? How do you get that message to a young person? A police officer may not necessarily know that. Youth workers might. They're working in specific organizations, they might. Researchers and universities monitor social media. So there are in fact quite a large number of organizations and groups working in that. In fact, I'm part of a consortium at the moment of universities, game developers. We're involved in developing a game to help people recognize where extremism and political extremism is taking place around them, and how they might respond to it. In particular, if that's taking the form of memes. Many of us are aware of memes. They're a kind of digital idea compressor that they communicate an idea through an image, and often the idea might be, in some cases anyway, very toxic, but it'll be linked to a humorous image, and you feel the humor of the image and you laugh, but you also find yourself laughing at a very toxic idea. Or so there's a lot of work at the moment going on in universities, in associations, around how you respond to the kinds of digital culture, how you support people in the NHS understand what they've got to do to manage their systems better. So there's a very, very large connection of and quite formal mechanisms around that. It's very important to recognize that this responding to digital crime is by no means something that let's say the formal police force or even the National Crime Agency, they can do alone. There's a whole network of NGOs, small businesses, game developers, social media companies. All of those people are involved in different ways. Banks, finance organizations, all of those people are involved in responding to that. So it's a really very important question. And therefore, it's an area that if you're studying this area in criminology, there are a whole range of pathways you can go into it. To go into an association, to go into an NGO, to go into policing, to go into the finance industry working for banks. Criminology graduates from Middlesex go and work in banks and part of it, one of the, some things I do is go to schools and tell people don't become a money mule. So there's a whole pathways for employment as well, reflecting the diversity of mechanisms, if you like. Multiple mechanisms mean multiple pathways for career once you're gone through, finished school and university. So thank you very much. It's a very important question. Any others? I hope I've answered that well enough. Great, thanks. So the questioner is very happy with the answer. Thank you very much. We've gone on for about 50 minutes now, so it's getting late in the day. I'm happy to go on, or I'm happy to finish up. My main message really is the breadth of issues involved, the kind of intellectual challenges to understand them, and that's what the discipline of criminology is about, but also criminology is an applied discipline, and it takes people on pathways to be able to do things about the issues they're exploring. And in that sense, it's embedded in a kind of career paths as well. So I think, Sophie, would that be, are you okay if we want to, last chance for finishing? Any other questions, or should we finish up?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to finish there. For anyone that wants to watch this back, you can watch it back on demand, or you will get sent recordings over the next week. For the person that's raised their hand, if you pop your question into the Q&A box, so you should either see that on the bottom of your screen, or if you're on a phone, that will be in the top left or right hand corner. We'll just hang around for
Sure.
if that person asks the question.
I've got a couple more minutes. And certainly, if not now, you're very welcome to send me an email or something like that, and I'd be very happy to answer you, or send you a link, or to somewhere, or point you in the direction of somebody who can answer you. Okay. Can you please tell me why I should choose this subject, and what's the hardest thing of this subject? Okay. Why you should choose it? Well, it's very much up to you. But if you want a kind of career that's going to be engaged, sort of grappling with real world issues, and one that's going to make a difference in a way, then that would be the reason to choose, I think, criminology. Now, what's the hardest thing in this subject? I'm just trying to think in terms of the school, A level, for example. You're probably best to ask at the school, or the college. At the university, it's hard to know what the hardest thing is. Certainly, you do need to be able to be alert to different sorts of things. At university, you'll be asked to do, you'd be able to do qualitative research, so read interviews and think about people talking about their experience. You may be asked to look about tables and think about what's this telling us about criminal patterns. You look at cultural things, such as, online worlds, what's going on here. So I suppose the hardest thing is it's a broad discipline, and that can be hard, but it's also energizing and challenging, I suppose. So I think that would be my sense. What's you've asked me what's the hardest thing in this subject? I think it's probably recognizing that diversity and being energized by it. Like all subjects to do well in, you need to find yourself in it. And perhaps that's the hardest thing. What does it mean to you? Why is it important to you? That, I think, is the hardest thing about any subject. If you can answer that, why am I studying this? Why does it matter to me? How is it part of who I am and what matters to me? That's perhaps the hardest thing about any subject. And once you can answer that, you're on the path to succeeding in that subject, whether it's criminology, mathematics, or whatever. You have to be able to say, why does this matter to me? What am I trying to do through learning this? How am I going to change? Also, how will I be able to offer new things to the world? So I think that's the answer to that. So thank you. Very important question again. And I think we're just on 5 to 6, so I think perhaps we should finish up there. Would that be true?
Absolutely. Yeah, we will finish up there.
Okay, so on my part, I'd like to say thanks very much, and please explore other areas as well, and hopefully we might get to see some of you even at Middlesex as students. That would be great.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Have a lovely evening. Bye.